Hi, I'm Charles. I own and direct Kaleidoscope Rock Academy and Kaleidoscope School of Music here in the Seattle area. And this is a series of videos that I'm doing on music myths. Things that I've heard from parents, from students, from other musicians, other teachers that usually have a kernel of truth to them, but more or less, I think, taking as generalizations are myths. So this one is a little bit trickier to unpack, but it is the idea that guitar players don't read music. Or some variants of this, rock musicians don't read music, famous rock musicians don't read music, or my favorite guitarist is awesome even though he or she does not read music. I mean, in each one of these videos, I've been looking at some of the problems with believing the myth in question or the consequences of it. So for this one, obviously one consequence is discouraging people who appreciate more contemporary music, rock guitar, from studying more traditional music theories such as reading notes on a staff. I think also this another consequence is it really promotes confusion about what music theory is. We'll get to that, and what it is not. And it also probably similarly creates confusion about what reading music or what written music means for guitar players. So we're gonna have to kind of dive into all of that. First off, I think let's look at what people mean. So, like a lot of myths, there's an oversimplification going on. So when someone says, "Oh, the Beatles didn't read music," what I think they're kind of saying is, "Wow, their talent had nothing to do with music theory or traditional music. They were just gifted. Wow, isn't that amazing?" But I think that there's a big difference between reading and writing traditional music and knowing music theory. So that's the first kind of thing to unpack here, is that you can know and utilize a lot of music theory on a guitar without actually having much skill or experience or predilection to writing notes on paper on the staff. For example, I'm guessing that the Beatles didn't write down in traditional music notation anything that they wrote. I would guess their producer might have written down stuff so that he could score it for all the other instruments they added to their later records, but they themselves were probably not writing it down. But I think the confusion is, I think a lot of people take from that observation that the Beatles didn't read or write music, they think they didn't know anything about music, or they didn't know how to talk in that language. They didn't know what chords were on the fretboard. You can know fretboard theory, which I could define as knowing the names of chords, knowing how to build different qualities of chords on the fretboard, knowing how to find them in different keys or with different roots like G, A, B, C on different places, knowing scale structures. You can know all of that with having no idea how to write it down. On guitar in particular, live, it can be shape based, so you might know like certain shapes on the guitar have certain musical qualities like major or minor, major 7, diminished, whatever, without actually knowing the letters behind that. You just kind of visually know that a certain shape has a certain quality. You also can know where the letters are for a lot of the fretboard, or especially the lower strings, lower pitched strings on guitar, without knowing how to write that down. So that's the first kind of like unpacking or clarification with that comment that guitarists don't read music. The other one, of course, which I've covered a lot in another series I did about music notation for guitarists, is really for guitar in particular, there isn't just one form of written music. There's traditional written music, which is probably the lowest one as far as guitar players actually knowing how to do it well, which is, using the symbols that look like golf clubs on fences for writing things down the way that like a pianist would traditionally. But guitar players use tab. Well, is tab written music? Absolutely. If you're reading tab, are you reading music? Not in the traditional sense, but I would say you're reading music because you're using something written, something external to guide what you're playing. So a lot of guitar players who say they don't read or write music actually write down tab, or they write down chord frames, which are the boxes that illustrate where you put your fingers on the frets and strings for particular chords. There's a lot of ways to write things down for guitar, writing chord names above lyrics. I cover a lot of this, like I said, in my music notation video, but any of those things I think counts as reading and writing music, so it doesn't help to kind of lump everything in with the traditional music notation and say that guitarists don't read or write music, because if they're doing any of those other things, I think they are reading and writing music, and the benefit of defining it that way is it kind of redefines your ability as a guitarist. You go, well, yeah, I'm not that familiar with reading and writing traditional music, but I do know how to read music. I know how to externalize my ideas on paper. I know how to take things that have been written down or that are displayed on a screen and create them on my fretboard using that external thing to guide my fingers. So that might give you a little bit more encouragement to also see, hey, maybe I could expand that to add traditional music. So I think that, the problem with myths in general is they close doors. They make you feel like you wouldn't want to do certain things with your musical studies. There's another corollary to this myth, which would be it's better if you want to be a really awesome rock player. It's better not to know how to read music. And the problem with that is, number one, it's probably not true. There's plenty of people who can read and write music who are really good players. But it also might discourage, because of the oversimplification of what reading and writing music means, it might discourage someone from seeing the value to other forms of music theory that are not paper-based or externalized on paper. The value of those theoretical concepts to being a really awesome guitar player. So I think it creates a mystique of like the naturally talented homegrown player who ignores all those rules. It really, there's two different things going on there. I mean, like, not reading and writing music is really separate from either following theory rules and how you construct your music or not following theory rules. And that's a whole other video. There definitely are things you say about composition that would make you think that rules can sometimes be limiting, or that they're made to be broken, or just plain out ignored. But that really doesn't have anything to do with the issue of whether a guitarist can read or write traditional notation. It's a different thing. So I think, again, the myth causes some confusion there. I think that, reading some bios of players might be a good thing. I know that Jimmy Page did a lot of studio work when he was younger, before Led Zeppelin. He's certainly a very, very creative guitar player who did his own thing, and with Led Zeppelin created a lot of great riffs, colored outside the lines quite a lot, I think. And his prior time as being a competent studio musician reading charts and so forth did not inhibit him from becoming that person. I once actually had a letter exchange with Jerry McPherson, who's a big studio guitarist who's played a lot of country things, a lot of Christian contemporary things. He was playing for Amy Grant at the time, and I actually wrote to Jerry McPherson, care of Amy Grant, care of Word Records, and he actually wrote me back, which in the 80s, which I thought was amazing. Really great guy at coming up with awesome guitar tones in the late 80s. He played on actually Jules' This Way album, which I think is an amazing studio accomplishment. That album came out in 2001, so he's been active for a long time. But he said in his letter to me that, like, luckily there's not a lot of single note reading in album work, but he did affirm that, like, guitar players who work in the studio do read charts. They read chord charts. They read things that producers and bands write out. So again, it's that oversimplification. Like, yeah, single note work might be the lowest thing. Reading single notes off the staff in the traditional form might be the lowest thing on a guitar player's priority list typically, but it's not an all or nothing category. So he's like, yeah, I do have to read chord charts, and I do have to work off of paper and things that people have laid out for me. I use paper to refer to anything that's externalized. I know a lot of it's on iPads and screens now, but it's the same difference. It was really great for him to share that information with me as a fledgling guitarist when I was just kind of looking forward towards a career in music. So I hope that again, that this myth gets kind of deconstructed by, the purpose of this video would be to kind of deconstruct that myth a little bit and say, yeah, there's some truth to it. Guitar players are not the greatest route for being good at traditional music writing and reading, but it's not that simple that, like, great guitarists don't read music or that great bands don't have any theory knowledge. It's just a gross oversimplification, and like many of these myths, you just got to see things more complicated to arrive at something closer to the truth. So I hope you enjoyed this video about guitarists and their propensity to read and write music. I actually would say of myself, just to wrap this up, I would say of myself, I am not the fastest at writing things down in traditional notation, and for a lot of guitar solos and things over the years as a teacher, I've gone to using tab instead of dots on a staff, partly because tab is so much better for being immediately position specific, but I definitely can read and write things on the staff when I need to. I'm kind of slower at it than I am at writing chord frames and tab and other things, but it's a very valuable part of what I do. It helps me communicate with keyboard players who are in my program, playing for my team bands. When I have guitarists who have studied more classical or more piano, I often do write their parts out on the staff if they're melody parts so that they can choose where to put them on the fretboard instead of having tab kind of force them to play them in a certain place. So I personally find reading, writing music one of the skills that I have in my skills bag, and it may not be one that I use quite as much, but I definitely use it. So traditional notation is great. So I don't want this myth to encourage people to close the door on that. You don't also, another correlate, you don't have to be great at this to use it. So you don't have to be, if you were creating another kind of rule or generalization that said you got to be, sold out to traditional music theory or traditional music writing to get good at it. No, you don't. Like many other things, you can be kind of okay at it, and that's still valuable. So I would hope that most of my guitar students at some point would get at least that kind of ability under their belt, so that when they're in situations where they have to read or write traditional music, they're not defining themselves as a person who can't do that, and they're not terrified. Just a kind of a cool little story. I've done 2 musicals for a private junior high school here in the Seattle area that pays pretty well for adult musicians to be the orchestra or band for their musicals for their middle school kids. And one of them I played mostly guitar, and there was chord charts on, because guitar, even arrangers who often don't really think like guitarists still, when they're writing scoring for guitar for a musical, they often put a lot of chord names in, which helps. But I agreed to do a second musical a couple of years later for the school, and she said, "Okay, you'll be the guy for guitar, for string things," because they had a drummer and a pianist. We'll get you the score. So when I get the score a week ahead of rehearsals, 2 weeks ahead of the production going live, it's like 32 pages of bass, clef notes on the staff. And I'm like, So I write to her and say, "You meant to send me this?" And she's like, "Yeah, you played bass in a couple songs the last production. This production really, we just need more bassist." So, she assumed because I played bass on a couple songs for the prior, because they didn't have like a budget for a bassist and a guitarist for the prior one. So, she just assumed that I was good to go on being a bassist for the second production. Well, I'm not super fast at reading some things on guitar in traditional notation, and I'm certainly slower on bass clef on bass. So, but because of my familiarity with, decades of reading and writing music, I was like, okay, I can do this. And I worked through it. It took me most of the day to work through those 32 pages and kind of make notes and position things on the paper that would help me actually play it in a rehearsal. But it's a great example of how that's a skill that could be a all-around working musician who gets paid for a lot of things as a guitarist or bassist. You actually need to know how to do. So you don't maybe have to do it to be in some famous rock band, but the more skills you have as a working musician, the more you get to do. You don't have to close any doors. So that concludes this video talking about guitarists and traditional reading. If you enjoy these mixed videos, there's more of them on the channel, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks.